So I wanted to say hello, welcome back. It's Dr. Kim Clover, and like I said, we're going to be talking about boundaries today. A very difficult topic, but one that I think is worth speaking about. So hopefully this will be helpful. Don't forget to like us on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter or now even on YouTube. So I am interested in helping you in anything in your life that is a difficulty. Send your questions or a topic that you would like to hear me discuss. We've been talking about good communication. So one of the things that I think is very helpful is understanding how good communication is part of every good relationship. Now, we talked about good communication. We've talked about understanding each other, and the goal of communication is understanding your partner's perspective. We've talked about responding and not reacting. We've also talked about setting boundaries. So all of those are part of good communication. So we need to talk more about the boundaries. So here we go. Boundaries, what are they? Why are they important? And I think that the reason that they are so important is because many of us go through our day with a boundaryless day. So what does that look like? We do what other people want and need us to do without considering whether that really is a good thing for us. And oftentimes we put other people above us or our need, and so therefore the boundaries that we need to learn to set will protect us in that situation. A boundaryless day looks like this. Your child gets up and says they don't want what you fixed for breakfast, and so you jump through the hoop even though you need to get to the back to get ready for yourself and make them a second breakfast. Your husband calls and says, I need you to prepare some extra food for tonight because I'm going to have some people in from out of town and we need to fix dinner. When you really are going to have to go to the store and run through all kinds of madness to make that happen. Your boss comes to you and says, hey, I need you to stick around and work later today because I need you to stick around and finish this project. And you've got an appointment that you need to get to, but you don't say anything and you stay. Your parents call and they say, hey, we really have a problem here at the house. I need you to come on by and fix it, or take me to a doctor, or do something that's going to inconvenience you and put you off from going to your exercise class. Your child lives at home and is an adult and is not paying rent and is really not doing any chores, and yet you are frustrated by that, but you say nothing. Those are all examples of living in a boundaryless day. So what is it we need to do to understand how to make that go better? The problems with not having the boundaries, we get frustrated. We stuff our emotions down. With each of those situations I just described, you didn't want any of those things to go down the way they do, but you don't say no. Over time, when we stuff our emotions and we say yes when we really need to say no, we get resentful or angry. And oftentimes it shapes the relationship. So you do it this one time, you're going to do it again. And they're going to ask you again and again and again. So oftentimes when we're stuffing emotions, our irritation is going to have to come out in another way. We can become more anxious. We can become more depressed. We can feel more anger. We can feel all kinds of things, overwhelmed, overbusy, tired, and just sick. So when we need to feel better, a lot of times I think we have to look at where do we need to set a boundary in our life, or boundaries. So what is a boundary? A boundary is a protective barrier that separates me from you. And in the physical world, we have boundaries. We have fences. We have signs that say stay out. We have guardrails. We have all kinds of protective barriers in our life, and yet those are physical barriers. The ones that I'm talking about are oftentimes emotional barriers. And these are protective barriers that keep us from being hurt from another person. Now, if you're going to set a boundary for a family member, you're not thinking they are trying to hurt you. However, when you do not set a boundary, you are hurt. And sometimes maybe you're hurting yourself. However, if you learn how to set a boundary, nobody has to be hurt. So remember our good communication skills. Assertive is the goal. Passive communication, your toes are stepped on. Aggressive communication, their toes are stepped on. Assertive communication is right there in the middle and nobody's toes are stepped on. That's the goal of setting a boundary. So if you go to a party and someone asks you, do you want another plate of food, and you don't have the ability to say no, and you say yes, that's passive communication. Aggressive communication would be attacking and say, don't you see or don't you know that I'm on a diet and I don't want that food? Back off. They didn't know. Assertive would simply be to say, no, thank you. So it's important to try working on these assertive boundaries. We are not all one person. There is a difference between me and you and my need and your need. So what we do need to look at is separating ourselves from other people and quit people pleasing. You're only responsible for yourself. You're only able to do what is good for you. And I think oftentimes what we do is get that all convoluted. We're trying to make everyone happy. Does this make any sense to anyone? Have you ever caught yourself trying to make everyone happy? Trying to make everybody happy with the meal that you cook, trying to make everyone happy with the vacation that you plan, trying to make everybody happy with the schedule. Whatever it is, there's not always a chance of pleasing everyone. So, boundaries are not trying to please everyone. They're trying to be rules followed. They're trying to be fair. They're trying to be good, but they're trying to be assertive, and you are protecting yourself instead of letting down all the rules and letting whatever take place. So, when my children were little, I used a playpen. I know probably those are obsolete. But what I would do was put a child in a playpen when I needed them to be safe. I wanted to keep them from getting close to the stove while I was cooking. I wanted them to stay out of my way when I was trying to vacuum. It was a barrier. It was a protective barrier between them and the rest of the world. And sometimes what I even tell my children today is the world is cruel, and we have to protect ourselves from the other people and the other things around us that aren't always positive for our lives. So just because it can be done, or just because we can have a relationship with that person, doesn't mean it is the right thing to do. So how do we know when we need to set a boundary? And I think the first thing is learning to listen to our instincts. And that is something a lot of people don't do. I think God gave us instincts at birth. They're God-given, they're inborn, they're innate, and they tell us when something is good for us, and they tell us when something is not good for us. They tell us when a yes should be said, and they tell us when a no should be said. So why do we often have problems with setting these boundaries? Why do we struggle so much with this topic? So I can give you, any of you can comment now and give me your solution or your idea on that, but I think there's several reasons, and I'm going to go over a few. One, I think we ignore our instincts. The baby that is born with an instinct to nurse or eat stops eating when that hunger is gone. How many of us ignore that instinct and therefore overeat and feel miserable, or overeat and gain weight? So that's one of those boundaries. It doesn't seem like that's a boundary, but a boundary oftentimes is setting a goal or saying no after we've eaten so much food or our hunger is gone. I think we not only ignore our instincts, I think we also are afraid of hurting other people's feelings. So if I say that to my friend, no, I don't want to come to your party, or no, I don't like that dress, I'm afraid it'll hurt her feelings. So I'm just going to be passive or tell a little white lie to keep from hurting her feelings. When I could say it very assertively and set a boundary, if you will. I don't like that dress on you, or I don't think that looks good on you. And she would respect that, I would think. So not only fear of hurting someone's feelings about a compliment, but fear of hurting someone's feelings when you set a boundary and say, no, I can't help in the church nursery this week, or no, I can't come to that party. I think we fear rejection. Rejection is one of the greatest fears in life. We fear someone is going to reject us and not like us. So instead of saying no, we often avoid the situation, or we don't say anything, and silence often is permission. And when we are silent about a situation, then we often will get that rejection after the fact, because the person continues with that behavior, and we've said nothing, and we've said nothing, and we've said nothing, and the relationship deteriorates. So don't fear rejection. Understand that you can simply say it positively, and know that if you stand on your grounds, it's not about you, it's about that other person if they're very defensive or rejecting or angry. Sometimes we fear speaking to authority and growing up. It is a great stance of maturity when we set a boundary and we try talking to people. But we do fear speaking to our bosses, or sometimes our mates, or our parents. But it is part of maturity. So it's another reason that boundaries, or setting boundaries, can be a problem. And then one of the ones that we talked about last week is we fear confrontation. Remember that setting a boundary oftentimes will be about a conflict, or that other person is not going to like what you are saying. But stand in there and stay in there until there's good communication that takes place. So how do we develop these boundaries? Now we know what a boundary is, and we know what it looks like not to have boundaries, and we know why people struggle with setting boundaries, but how do we start developing boundaries? The first thing is get a strong sense of self. And I think probably several of you are looking at me thinking, I don't know what in the world you're talking about. That is a very difficult task. It may be, but figure out who you are, what you stand for, what your convictions are, what you value. And if you know who you are and you are grounded, then you are more likely to set your boundaries. If you aren't grounded, you may go with whomever or whatever they believe in for that day. So get grounded. Quit people pleasing and know who you are and what you believe in. Secondly, listen to your instincts. They're God-given, they're innate, they're there, they work. Sometimes they're very quiet because we haven't listened to them. Stand your ground and start listening. If your instincts say it's not okay, it's not okay. So you can say no. See yourself as separate from other people. It's okay if your husband wants to go for a run and you do not. You're not the same people. It's okay if your kids want breakfast for dinner and you don't want to cook that. It's okay to set a boundary if it's not okay for you. So just because your children or your husband or your boss or your mate needs something doesn't mean you have to jump through the hoops of delivering it. If it's something that you can fit into your schedule, do it. If it's not, tell them when you can do it. Or if it's not something that you're willing to do, tell them that. So it's also important that we not only set boundaries for other people, but if we want to have boundaries for ourselves, we need to know how to do that for other people. We're not going to set boundaries for ourselves if we can't do it in respect to other relationships. So that's probably a starting point, is understanding not only are you important and other people are important, but those boundaries in both of those relationships, your self-care and your relationships with others, are important. So there's a mind-body connection. When your instincts tell you this is not okay, listen to that, have a thought about it, and then communicate it. This is the role that I want you to start trying to play. Listen to your instincts, listen to your thoughts, put those words into action. It's going to feel scary, not doing something wrong, doing something new. And it sometimes feels very scary. So you're important. Remind yourself that you're important, and then be willing to stand on what you need in that moment. I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions, a couple of ideas of what a boundary looks like. The most famous boundary, if you will, is no. And oftentimes you don't have to apologize for it. You don't have to excuse it. You simply have to say, no, that won't work for me. No, I can't do that today. Or stop. Unfortunately, I've talked to a lot of people that have abused in their life, and what they finally said was, it stopped when I said, stop, no more. That's a boundary. It's a hard one, but sometimes what we have to do is speak up and set that boundary. That won't work for me. That's another boundary. I have to walk away because this is getting very volatile. That's a boundary. That is not okay. That's a boundary. Stop, like we said before. That, don't speak to me that way. That's a boundary. All of those are listening to your instinct and then responding with a very assertive comment that is a boundary. So I hope this helps. Add this to your skills of good communications. Setting those boundaries in an assertive way. Don't be afraid. Step out, try something new, and see if it works for you. I hope this has been helpful. Again, if you find that you have another topic that you would like me to discuss, feel free to do that. And I am going to try to send you a link now at the end of this broadcast, if you'll ignore me looking into the camera and trying to find a place where I can put a comment. There is that book, Boundaries, that I want you to look into. If you want to learn more about how to set boundaries, do so, because I really think it could be helpful in your relationships and make your life feel much less chaotic and less overwhelming. I hope this has been helpful. Good luck and God bless. See you next time.